In the old house, where memories linger, Elara returns after her wedding to reconnect with the father she had unintentionally distanced herself from. She believes that a simple apology will heal everything. But among the old wooden toys, she uncovers a truth more painful than the distance itself. She is the reason her parents divorced. Will her father's enduring love be enough to heal the wounds that his daughter unknowingly inflicted? And will Elara be able to face the tragedy she never knew she caused? This version adds a powerful dramatic element. She is the reason her parents divorced, transforming the story from a personal tragedy into a family drama with deeper emotional layers. Nathan sat in the old car, the one that had been with him for so many years, a car that had witnessed countless emotions, memories tied to lives filled with the passing years, the steps taken, and the places he had walked with Elara, his daughter. This car had seen it all, from the long trips taking Elara to school, to the times he took her out, to the conversations by the roadside, in the empty streets, on rainy afternoons. Now, this car was nothing more than a glass cage, trapping him in his own world. Looking out through the window, the light from the wedding outside shone brightly, reflecting everything, yet it could not touch his heart, could not soothe the rising pain within him. Laughter echoed from outside, like waves crashing into his ears, but it couldn't break through the barrier of silence, of loneliness. Nathan couldn't grasp that joy, couldn't feel that happiness. Everything seemed like a distant scene, no longer belonging to him. The faces lit up by the lights, the heartfelt handshakes, the congratulatory words. Everything was happening right before his eyes, but he could not step in, could not participate. Even though he was just a pane of glass away, he couldn't merge into that joy, couldn't become a part of the life that was evolving for his daughter. His eyes slowly shifted away from the crowd, searching for Elara's figure. She stood amidst the wedding, in a pure white wedding dress, smiling happily next to the man she had chosen as her life partner. Nathan could clearly feel the change, the maturity, and the steadiness in Elara with each step she took. But his heart couldn't keep up with those steps. He could clearly sense that he was being pushed out, no longer important in his daughter's life. For a moment, he wondered if his love still had space for her, or if it was now filled only with fading memories, with fleeting moments that could not be grasped. Memories of Elara as a child suddenly rushed back to him. He remembered the image of the frail little girl, holding tightly to his hand whenever she felt scared or worried. The late nights he stayed up to take care of her when she was sick, the mornings when he woke early, made breakfast, and then took her to school. Every action he took back then was aimed at ensuring she grew up in a space filled with love, protected and cared for. He had never stopped sacrificing, never stopped striving so that Elara could have a better future, so she could be happy. But now, Elara was no longer that little girl. She had grown up, stepped into a new phase of her life, and he, that father, was now nothing more than a shadow standing outside, unable to step in. The feeling of being excluded from his daughter's world was a pain Nathan could not explain. He wondered how there could be such a great distance between him and her, between father and daughter. All the love, all the care, all the sacrifices he had made now felt like a soothing wave, leaving a silence between them. Everything he had now seemed to be no longer what she needed. She had her own life, her own family, and he was no longer an indispensable part of her world. That feeling was painful, unbearable. Every passing second, Nathan felt as though he was being pulled into an endless spiral. The lights from the wedding stage reflected on the surface of the lake, creating flashing streaks, like the shattered memories he and Elara once shared, impossible to piece together. He remembered the moments when he and Elara laughed together, the trips they took, the times it was just him and her, in a warm, peaceful world of their own. But now, as Elara stood beside another man, stepping into a new journey, he felt like he was a part of the past, no longer welcome in her future. Seeing Elara in her wedding dress, Nathan couldn't help but think of the days when he had carefully cared for her, The days when he was always the first to see her smile, the one she always ran to when faced with difficulties. Those memories appeared vividly, but they only made him feel the loss more. He wanted to stand beside Elara in this moment, but he couldn't. Even though he was there, he was just a stranger, an outsider. Nathan's eyes blurred, the wedding lights reflecting in his eyes, creating blurred streaks. He tried to swallow the emotions rising in his chest, but the more he tried to hold back, the more he felt like everything was falling apart. The tears he had long forbidden himself to shed now seemed ready to spill, but he couldn't let them fall. Those tears were a sign of weakness, and he had long been accustomed to not allowing himself to be weak. But in this moment, seeing Elara in her wedding dress, he could no longer control his emotions. He couldn't stop thinking about the years that had passed, the efforts he had put in, the days when he had given his heart and strength to her. Everything seemed like it wasn't enough to keep her by his side. The laughter from the wedding echoed into the car, like a mockery of him, of the love he had devoted over the years. That laughter made his heart ache even more. It felt like a reminder that no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he sacrificed for her, he could never keep her forever. Elara had moved on, started a new life, and he was just an outsider. Nathan sat in the old car, holding a photo like a precious item he could not part with. The photo had accompanied him through many years, bearing the marks of unforgettable memories, moments he had shared with Elara, his beloved daughter. It was a time when he thought he would always be the one to protect and love her, the one irreplaceable in her life. But now, as he looked at that old photo, he felt like an outsider in his daughter's life. The photo, though old, still retained its pristine beauty. The faded lines over time could not erase its charm. In the picture, Nathan's hand tightly grasped Elara's tiny hand when she was just a little girl, with long hair cascading over her shoulders, her innocent eyes, and complete trust in him. They stood on a lush green lawn, the warm summer sunlight shining down, creating a scene full of love. That simple hand-holding contained all the love he had for her. In those days, everything in his eyes was Elara, his only daughter, the one he loved, protected, and cared for. Looking at the photo, Nathan smiled softly, a fleeting smile as though recalling a beautiful time. But just for a brief moment, that smile faded, replaced by a feeling of tightness in his chest, a deep sadness he couldn't erase. The years had passed too quickly. Those happy moments had become a distant past, never to return. He smiled at those memories, but the pain surged strongly, impossible to conceal. The yellow streetlights filtered through the car's window, casting gentle streaks of light on the photo. The old creases in the picture seemed like cracks in memory, marks that time could not erase. These folds seemed like moments he couldn't hold on to, precious seconds that slipped away from his grasp. These were the times he was busy with work, thinking there was plenty of time to be with Elara, to watch her grow, to care for her, but time passed so quickly that he hadn't realized. Those cracks, those creases, were reminders that he had missed so much, that he couldn't hold on to everything, not even the precious moments in his daughter's life. The creases on the photo were like wounds in his heart. They weren't just folds on paper. They were deep scars in Nathan's soul, pains he had tried to hide, tried not to let show. Every time he looked at the photo, he remembered the days when he and Elara faced so many hardships together. But now, Elara had grown up, had stepped into a new life. No longer the little girl by his side. He was no longer the first man she turned to when there was a problem. No longer the one she trusted completely. The times he taught her to drive, the times they sat together on the swing in the garden, the times he showed her how to cook her favorite dishes, all those moments had now become part of the past, never to be relived. That old photo, though worn by time, still held marks that could never fade. But even when he looked at the photo, his heart felt an indescribable emptiness. The pain of seeing Elara in her wedding dress, now a grown woman who no longer needed him. He couldn't help but feel he had been discarded, that he was only a part of her past, a part she would eventually forget as she moved on to her new life. Those emotions, those sorrows, were like a quiet river, sweeping away everything he had tried to build over the years. The light from the street lamps illuminated the photo, highlighting the creases and cracks. It was like a broken painting, a picture of the past he could never mend. That feeling, the feeling of having lost everything precious, now made it impossible for him to stay composed. Tears threatened to fall, but were suppressed. He had learned not to cry, learned not to show emotion, because he knew no one could understand his pain. He understood that, no matter how much he cried or how painful it was, Elara would continue to move forward, would continue to build her life without him in it. But even so, he could not take his eyes off the photo. Even though it had faded, even though time had blurred it, that photo was still all he had, still what he kept in his heart, no matter how much reality had changed. In that photo, he was still the only one in Elara's life, and she was still the daughter he had always loved and protected. But that was just the past, a past that could never return, a past he could never hold on to. The laughter from the wedding outside echoed into the car, but Nathan could not feel that joy. For him, it was just a stark contrast to the silence in his heart. It felt like he was standing in the middle of a world he no longer belonged to, a world where he could only stand outside and watch. Every time he looked at the photo, he saw himself gazing at a past that had passed, at a part of his life that now was just a blur of memories, unreachable dreams. Nathan sighed deeply, gently placing the photo down. He knew he couldn't keep those memories in his heart forever. Time could not rewind, and Elara had grown up, had her own life. But deep down, Nathan still couldn't let go. That old photo, with all its creases and cracks, was the most important part of his life. The part he couldn't do without in his memories of a time gone by, a time when he had given his whole heart and strength to love his only daughter. Every morning, before the first rays of dawn could pierce through the window, Nathan awoke in the quiet solitude of his small house. The house, with its faded walls and old tiled roof, was the place he had called home for many years. There was no noise, no rush of modern life, just an unusual stillness, as if part of the steady rhythm he had chosen for himself. Each morning, he woke up in the dim light, like a long-standing habit he had become too accustomed to. The alarm clock didn't ring, because he didn't need it. As soon as he felt his body awaken, he knew a new day had begun. Nathan's footsteps on the old wooden floor creaked softly, not rushed, not noisy. He didn't want to disturb the silence of this space, as if he wanted to preserve all the peaceful moments before the busyness of life began. To keep the space filled with the morning's tranquility, he moved gently and slowly. The sensation of each step, every movement, every breath in that small space made him feel a strange calm, as though everything in life had its own reason and purpose. When he entered the kitchen, he turned on the gas stove, producing soft crackling sounds from the small flame. The kitchen began to warm up, and the sound of boiling water from the kettle rang out like a signal of a new day. The faint steam from the kettle drifted through the air, carrying with it a warm, familiar feeling. The mild aroma of weak coffee began to rise from the old drip filter, sitting on a chipped porcelain cup, the bitter yet gentle scent awakening his senses. He didn't like strong coffee, not because he disliked it, but because to him, each morning was a moment of stillness to reflect and savor each moment before the outside world swept everything away. Each drop of coffee fell steadily, creating a rhythmic sound like the beating of his own heart. Every morning, he only needed a cup of weak coffee and a slice of crispy toast, and that was enough. Nothing extravagant, nothing luxurious. Simple things like that were the essence of his life, what he needed to start a working day. His breakfast wasn't to fill his stomach, it was to create a routine, to feel the calmness in life each day. He didn't need anything more, just those moments of quiet before the new day began. Sitting down on the old wooden chair, Nathan's eyes drifted to the wall clock. The numbers, though faded with time, still reflected a bit of light from the window. Every day, when the light from outside began to shine into the house, he knew a new day had arrived. But in his heart, there was always an indescribable stillness. Each morning, as he had breakfast, he thought of Ilara, of what he could do for her. Every gesture, every action in his daily life wasn't just a simple task. They contained all the love and effort he had given to her. Each day, he reminded himself that no matter what life threw his way, he had to keep going, had to stay strong to protect her. After finishing breakfast, Nathan didn't hurry, didn't race against time. He slowly cleaned up, as if everything needed to be done in peace. His worn-out shoes slipped on gently. Those shoes, though old and worn, had been his faithful companion for so many years, carrying him through countless roads, countless turns in life. They were not just shoes, they were the marks of his life, the connection between the past and the present. Even though the shoes had worn soles, they still stood firm under his feet, each step taken steadily, without the need to hurry. Leaving the house, he stepped out with his old car, the same car he had used for many years. That car wasn't new, but it was the only means of transportation that helped him get to the small workshop where he worked. The road to the workshop wasn't far, but every time he passed, he felt as though something in that very road had changed. The road remained the same. The old houses still stood still by the roadside, but within him, there was an unfamiliar feeling. Perhaps it was the change in his perspective, the change in his mind, as Ilara was about to step into a new life. He couldn't deny that the feeling of loss was approaching. But no matter what, he continued to drive that old car, continued down the road he had chosen, still holding on to his perseverance, despite the anxiety in his heart. Upon reaching the workshop, Nathan entered the familiar space. The small workshop, with its worn walls, the scent of wood and metal lingering in the air, was where he had worked every day for many years. The tools and machines, though old, still operated smoothly and were the tools he loved. In the workshop, everything was simple, but also precise. Every task he undertook, whether small or complex, showed the meticulousness and care he put into each product. To him, every job had its own value. But the most important thing in all his work was that everything he did was for Ilara. The sounds of machines, hammers, and metal clashing echoed, but they weren't loud. To Nathan, they were just a part of life. Like the steady rhythm of the work he had done for so many years, his work wasn't just about creating a product. It was about building a future for Ilara, a future in which he hoped she would live happily and safely, no matter how much he had to sacrifice. When he saw the items he had created, he felt the love, the joy in every line, every small detail. Every day he worked was a day lived for his daughter, a day devoted to her future. When the workshop closed, he returned home, feeling the cool night breeze. His worn-out shoes stepped steadily along the familiar road. Even though everything outside may change, Nathan knew that the love he had for Ilara was the one thing that would never change. One weekend morning, Nathan decided to drive his old car to visit Ilara. After spending a quiet day in his small workshop, he felt the need for some closeness, to see his daughter again and witness how she was living in her own world. Although he had become accustomed to the solitude and independence of his life, there were moments when he felt the need for connection, to see Ilara and ease the lingering anxiety in his heart. She was everything to him, the motivation that kept him going each day. And even though she had grown up and her life was now far removed from the simple days of her childhood, he couldn't shake the feeling that she still needed him, that she still needed her father's protection, even if only for the smallest things. He brought along the wooden toy he had carved for Ilara when she was a little girl. The toy was a small wooden boat, meticulously crafted from aged wood, with every detail on the boat's hull imbued with the love and time he had given to his daughter. It was the only gift he could make for her, a simple yet profoundly meaningful token of the care and boundless love he had for her during her growing years. Each carved mark on the boat was a moment he had painstakingly spent perfecting it, hoping that his daughter would see it as a cherished memory. When he arrived at Elara's house, Nathan immediately sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Her home, though small, had been transformed, brimming with youthfulness and energy. The surrounding space was filled with modern furniture and conveniences, all reflecting Elara's lifestyle. As he stepped into the house, he couldn't help but feel a bit out of place. Everything now seemed foreign to him, as if he was no longer part of her life. The old homes, the simple things he was accustomed to, no longer matched the modern life of his beloved daughter. He saw Elara sitting on the couch, her eyes fixed on her phone, her fingers scrolling through messages and plans for her upcoming wedding. For Nathan, weddings and major life events always made him feel out of place, not because he wasn't happy for his daughter, but because of the changes they brought to both their lives. Elara now had her own life, her own concerns, worries about a new future, a path where he was no longer the one leading the way. Nathan quietly placed the wooden boat on the table in front of Elara, hoping she would notice it. The wooden toy wasn't just a gift, it was a piece of memory, a testament to the father-daughter bond he had devoted to her throughout her growing years. But when Elara glanced at the boat, gave a brief, gentle smile, and then returned to her phone, Nathan's heart sank. The smile, though warm, lasted only a moment before fading away, as though it was just another normal part of her busy life. There were no words, no questions about the old toy. Elara was no longer the little girl Nathan could talk to for hours about simple things, about the gifts he had made for her. She was too busy with her own life now. The feeling of being left behind, forgotten in Elara's new world, made Nathan's throat tighten. But he couldn't blame her. He knew that life had to go on, that she had to find her happiness and build a new future. But in that moment, in the bright, modern room, amid the glowing lights and the phone shining in Elara's hands, he felt a strange distance. The wooden toy, the small boat he had carefully crafted, now lay there quietly, overshadowed by the bright light of the phone. Every detail of that toy, every meticulous line he had poured his effort into, was now just a part of the past, a part of a time that had passed, never to return. On the table, Elara's phone lit up with incoming messages, wedding notifications, and details for the upcoming event, all claiming her attention. The screen seemed to consume all of her focus, leaving the wooden gift lost in the shadows, unnoticed. She didn't even notice the boat sitting right in front of her, though it had once been her favorite toy, the embodiment of a father's love. Nathan's attention, his care, seemed no longer enough to capture her interest, as she was too focused on things more important to her, her wedding, her future plans. Nathan stood silently in that space, his heart heavy. Although Elara didn't intend to neglect him, he could clearly feel the distance. The things he had done for her, the small gifts from her childhood, now seemed like a distant memory. He wondered if those feelings still held meaning for Elara, if the moments they shared as father and daughter still had a place in her life. Looking at Elara, Nathan couldn't help but think of the days when he had taught her, cared for her, bringing her simple gifts to mark moments of love. The wooden toy, now not just a keepsake, but a symbol of the unconditional love he had for her. But now, those gifts, though they still existed, no longer had a place in Elara's life. That gift, though simple, carried hopes and efforts, but now seemed to have no significance in the world she was building. Without saying anything more, Nathan turned and left the room, the light from Elara's phone still shining brightly in the darkness. The wooden toy, small as it was, remained there in the shadows, quietly waiting for attention that seemed to never come. He knew Elara's life had changed, but he couldn't deny that the feeling of loss and distance still lingered in his heart, like a wound that would never heal. Nathan stepped into the small cafe, the very place where he and Elara had spent countless hours together. It was where, every Sunday morning, he would bring her to enjoy a hot cup of coffee and chat about the simple things in life. This cafe was where he felt the deep connection between father and daughter, where, despite being just a young girl, Elara always had questions, shared her worries, and spoke of her small dreams. The cozy room, with its compact space and old wooden table, had witnessed so many intimate moments between them. Conversations, laughter, the sound of Elara's bright giggles. But today, as Nathan stepped in, he could feel the shift, the unmistakable realization that he was no longer the most important person in Elara's life. Her future husband sat waiting in a corner of the cafe, bathed in the warm light from a chandelier above. He stood up when he saw Nathan, tall and confident, a bright smile on his face. His eyes betrayed a certain self-assurance, probably because this was the first time he was meeting Elara's father, and he wanted to make a good impression. But for Nathan, the whole scene felt strange. The man looked polite and friendly, but to Nathan, he was a stranger, slowly stepping into his daughter's life. They shook hands, and he greeted Nathan warmly. But deep inside, Nathan felt a wave of unease he couldn't quite explain. They sat down, exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, before Elara's fiancé finally spoke about the thing that Nathan had been dreading. "Hello, sir, don't worry. Elara's fine now. She's in good hands. I will take care of her." The words came out sweetly, with good intentions. But to Nathan, they were a silent declaration, an undeniable message that his role in his daughter's life had come to an end. Though perhaps meant to reassure, the words landed heavily on Nathan. "Don't worry." Those words felt like an invisible hand pushing him out of Elara's life. "Don't worry," they echoed in his mind, reminding him that Elara had grown up, had found someone else, and he, as her father, was no longer the most important person in her world. The years he had spent working, caring for, and protecting her seemed to have little value now. When he heard those words, Nathan could only remain silent. The words of his future son-in-law reverberated in his head, but the truth cut deep into his heart. He was no longer needed in Elara's life. It was a feeling he couldn't voice, couldn't share with anyone. After all, he was still her father, the one who had sacrificed everything for his family, but now everything seemed to slip away from him. As they sat in the cafe, the fiancé's words seemed to circle in Nathan's mind, trapping him in thought. He took a sip of his coffee, but it was cold. The steam no longer rose from the cup, replaced by a cold emptiness he couldn't describe. The bitterness of the coffee was no longer the familiar warmth he felt every morning. It was harsh, difficult to swallow, like the emotions building inside him. The fiancé's words were like a heavy weight on Nathan's heart, suffocating him. Each drop of coffee seemed like a reminder of the growing distance between him and Elara, a change he couldn't undo. "I will take good care of her." The fiancé's words felt like a sharp knife, severing the bond between Nathan and Elara. He remembered the days when he was the only one standing behind her, the one she would run to when things got tough, the one she trusted and loved most. Now, everything had changed. Elara had someone else, and Nathan was just an outsider, watching from afar, unable to join in her joy and happiness. The bitterness of the coffee now wasn't just a drink, but a sense of loss, a feeling that he could no longer touch his daughter's heart. Though Nathan said nothing, each word from the fiancé seemed to deepen the silence in his heart. The simple words, though intended kindly, erased all the sacrifices and care he had given Elara, all the effort, all the love. None of it seemed to matter any more to her. He had endured so much, worked tirelessly to care for his family, to raise Elara, but now all he received in return were disconnected words of comfort from a stranger. The fiancé continued speaking about wedding plans, about the details Elara was concerned with. He spoke about the work ahead, the things Elara would have to face, but Nathan could barely hear him. His mind was consumed with those words. He couldn't forget the feeling of being replaced, pushed out of Elara's life, even though she hadn't meant to do so. The moments they had shared, the times when she would run into his arms for comfort and protection, had vanished, and he couldn't reclaim them. The coffee was now cold, losing the warmth it once offered, just like Nathan's mood. The fiancé sat across from him, continuing to talk about wedding plans, but Nathan no longer heard him. The image of Elara, the little girl he had devoted his life to, now seemed like a distant memory, a faded recollection he could no longer hold on to. All that remained was the deep silence in his heart and the bitterness left in the cup. Each word from the fiancé, no matter how well-meaning, couldn't heal the wound in Nathan's heart. Every word, every sentence only served to deepen the distance between him and Elara, between father and daughter, between the past and the present. All he could do was sit there, silently, staring at the cold cup of coffee, while the fiancé continued to speak, continuing to build a future that Nathan could no longer be a part of. That whole day, the air in the garden, where the wedding photo shoot was taking place, was filled with joy and laughter. The first rays of sunlight of the day filtered through the leaves, casting soft, diagonal streaks of light, warming the space while simultaneously highlighting the contrast between Elara in her pure white wedding dress and Nathan, the father, standing outside the new life she was beginning. She was no longer the innocent little girl chasing simple dreams by her father's side, but now a grown, radiant woman, ready to step into a new chapter of her life. And Nathan, the father who had devoted his life to caring for and protecting her, could only stand outside, watching this most important moment of her life without being able to partake in her joy. Nathan held a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, Elara's favorite flowers since she was little. The petals were a part of his memory, reminding him of the times he and Elara ran to the garden together, picking flowers, teaching her how to care for the chrysanthemums, nurturing them as he had always nurtured her heart. The bouquet, now in his hands, seemed insufficient to convey all the love he had for her. Though he tried to smile, a deep pain lingered in his heart, a sorrow he could not express. Elara, in her immaculate white wedding dress, looked like a princess from the fairy tales Nathan had once told her when she was a little girl. She stood amidst the crowd, accepting compliments, the hands that reached out to congratulate her. Everything seemed to shine and be beautiful, but Nathan felt like a ghost in that space. He stood there, outside the frame, amidst the laughter and the continuous clicks of the cameras, but no one saw him. Not because he didn't want to join the crowd, but because he felt he no longer had a place in his daughter's world. When Elara turned back to look at him, her gaze, though warm, was no longer the look of a little girl needing her father's care, but that of a woman who had found her confidence, who had found the man she would spend her life with. She glanced at him briefly, offering a polite, gentle smile, but it was not a smile of love. It was simply courtesy, a natural reaction from someone who had grown up and begun a new life. Elara turned away almost immediately, resuming her pose, continuing her walk, while Nathan could only stand still, the bouquet of white chrysanthemums still in his hand, unsure of what to do with the gift he had given her, unsure if she would even recognize all that he had done for her, all that he had given to her over the years. Elara's steps, graceful and light in her wedding dress, seemed like a breeze sweeping through Nathan's life. She turned away, continuing her life, stepping into a new chapter, and he, the father, could only watch from afar, unable to step into that moment. The cameras kept clicking, the flashes went off endlessly, capturing the bright, joyful moments. But in Nathan's heart, there was only profound silence. He looked at her, looked at his daughter, but he felt as though he was too distant, unable to touch her, unable to stay in that moment. The bouquet of white chrysanthemums in his hands began to wilt, the petals gradually withering under the sunlight, just like the love he had for Elara, a love strong and unbreakable, but now lifeless, no longer able to exist in the new life she was building. The petals slowly fell, and Nathan watched as the flowers before him slowly lost their vibrancy, fading from the bright freshness they once had. All that was left were the wilted petals in his hands, a stark contrast between Elara's radiant beauty and the fading flowers in his grasp. He couldn't help but think back to the days when Elara was still the innocent little girl who would run to him when things got difficult, always seeking him out when she needed protection. Back then, he was the one she could trust, the one she turned to whenever she needed a safe place. But now, as Elara had grown up, she had someone else by her side, someone who would walk with her through challenges, share her worries, and be there for the important moments of her life. And he, despite being her father, could only stand outside, looking in but unable to enter her new life. The bouquet of white chrysanthemums in his hands now seemed useless. It no longer had the power to brighten the space, to change anything. The petals seemed to signify the end of a chapter in his life, a chapter he could not return to, could not hold on to. And in that moment, Nathan felt a wave of loneliness rise within him, a feeling of being lost, one he could not put into words. The clicking of the cameras continued, the flashes still illuminating the room, but Nathan felt like a ghost in that world. Each time he looked at Elara, he couldn't help but remember the days when he was the most important person in her life, when he was the one she trusted and ran to for comfort. But now, he was just an outsider, unable to share in those moments, unable to continue playing the role of a father in her life. The bouquet of white chrysanthemums in his hands had almost fully wilted, each petal drooping and losing its original beauty. The petals gradually fell, as if marking the end of a relationship, of a chapter in his life that he could no longer hold on to. The memories of Elara, of the times when he protected and cared for her, were now just in his heart, like those white chrysanthemums, beautiful, but ultimately facing the inevitable fading. Nathan stood there, silently, watching Elara, watching her steps, watching the bouquet of white chrysanthemums in his hands, feeling powerless to do anything more. And in that moment, amidst the wedding photo shoot, he felt distinctly that he had become a part of the past, a part of a memory that could never return, never be changed. Elara's wedding reception took place in a grand space, filled with colors and lights. The sparkling chandeliers on the ceiling created an atmosphere of elegance, their light casting a shimmering glow on everything, from the pristine white tablecloths to the exquisite dishes arranged on them. The soft background music played from the speakers, and the laughter of Elara's friends and loved ones blended into the space, creating a perfect picture of happiness. Everything was flawless, and Elara, in her spotless white wedding dress, was more radiant than ever, like an angel standing amidst the circle of love from those closest to her. But for Nathan, everything was different. He sat quietly at a table at the back, far from the center of the reception, where all eyes were focused on the bride. The feeling was suffocating. He was no longer the first person Elara shared her joy with, no longer the most important person in her life. Everyone gathered around her, enveloping her in their blessings, while he, despite being her father, could only sit on the outside, like an invisible guest, unable to partake in that sacred moment. His gaze could not leave Elara. He looked at her, eyes full of love, but also filled with complex emotions. She stood there, in her magnificent wedding dress, beautiful and graceful, yet distant. She had grown up, and Nathan realized that she no longer needed him the way she once did. His little girl was now a woman, with a family of her own, with someone else to love and protect her, not him. The thought pierced his heart. He tried to swallow those emotions, but they could not remain silent. They surged with every breath, every passing second. In those moments, Elara was the epitome of maturity, the fulfillment of all the hopes Nathan had for her. But at the same time, she was a reminder of the changes he couldn't stop feeling. The years he spent raising and caring for her seemed to have reached their end. The little girl he had soothed and taught had now entered a new life, and he was now merely a part of her past. A little while later, Nathan stood up, feeling the urge to be a part of this moment. He wanted to stand beside his daughter, to capture a photo, a picture in which he was still the father standing next to her. Even though he was part of the past, he still wanted to be present in these significant moments of her life. He slowly walked toward the center, where the guests were gathering, where everyone was posing for pictures. But as he neared the area, Elara's in-laws, people he didn't know very well, inadvertently invited him to stand aside. The feeling hit him like a shock, not because it was intentional or malicious, but because it reflected the truth he had felt for so long. He stood still, looking at the people around him, those who were no longer part of the past he had shared with Elara. The polite but unintentional invitation felt like a confirmation that he was no longer important in his daughter's life. He was no longer the one she turned to for protection or love. Everything had changed, and he was left on the outside, watching that change unfold. Nathan said nothing, only stood there, as if time itself had paused in that moment. A wave of emotions swelled within him, but he couldn't let them burst out. All his feelings were suppressed, unable to escape. He saw his reflection in a mirror, feeling the distance coming from all sides. In the bright light of the reception, he felt like a ghost, an outsider that no one paid attention to. His steps, slow and heavy, seemed to pull him farther from the crowd, farther from the new life Elara was building. His shadow stretched long across the floor under the stage lights. The streaks of light, which should have illuminated every dark corner, now only highlighted his loneliness. His shadow grew longer, stretching like a part of the loss, of a time that could not return. In the stage lights, his image was pushed outside the frame, further emphasizing his absence from Elara's life. It was an unavoidable dark space, one he could not find a way out of. The feeling of being forgotten, of being separated, spread within him like an unhealable wound. The people around him were laughing, posing, capturing memories in photos. But he, despite being the father of the bride, could not take part in this moment, could not stand near her. He could only stand alone, like a stranger, looking at that happy family from a distance. Each step he took, each turn he made, felt like an invisible abandonment. The bouquet of white chrysanthemums he had prepared that morning now seemed meaningless in his hands. The soft, delicate petals were beginning to wilt under the sunlight and time, just like the love he had for Elara, strong for so many years, but now unable to stand against this change. He paused for a moment, looking down at his hands, at the bouquet of white chrysanthemums, with each petal falling like memories fading away. Those petals, once symbols of pure love, of care, of all the years he had devoted to Elara, now seemed no longer fresh, just like everything in his life. Just like the love he had for her, now overshadowed by time and change, everything suddenly felt dull, as though he was no longer important, as though he had become a part of the past that Elara no longer needed. His steps felt heavy, and he could not continue. The feeling of emptiness was unavoidable. His shadow stretched long, slowly dragging behind him with every step, as if each footstep was pulling him farther away from his daughter. The little girl he had once loved and cared for was no longer the child in his arms. The atmosphere in the wedding reception room was filled with joy and radiant light, but Nathan felt like a fading ghost within that space. The entire room shimmered with light, everyone laughing, posing for pictures, yet he could only stand there, on the outskirts of happiness, like someone who no longer had a place in his daughter's life. Elara's wedding, the moment he should have been the most important person in, had become a ceremony he could not participate in, could not integrate into. Nathan stood at the edge of the frame, outside the gathering as everyone else posed for pictures. The flashes from the cameras lit up the scene, capturing the bright moments of his daughter's life. Elara, the bride in her magnificent wedding dress, stood beside her new husband, her smile radiant, glowing like a star. Looking at her, Nathan could clearly feel that this was the most beautiful moment in her life, the moment she had been waiting for. But in that moment, he felt like a distant figure, someone who no longer had a role in her life. Elara's family, her friends, were all joyful, showering her with blessings, but Nathan could only stand there, in silence, watching from afar. His heart felt suffocated, a sense of separation he couldn't explain. Elara glanced at him briefly, a quick smile crossing her lips. But that smile was no longer the smile of the little girl he once cared for, cherished, and protected every day. It was the smile of a woman who had found the man of her life, and the father was no longer the most important person in her life. Elara smiled when she saw him, but it was just a polite, fleeting smile. And then she quickly turned back to her husband, lost in her own joy. Meanwhile, Nathan stood there, a part of the happiness, yet a faded part, forgotten in the vast space of joy. He stood at the edge of the frame, unable to step in, unable to touch that happiness, only silently watching his daughter. Her smile no longer meant for him, but only a part of the perfect picture of the new life she was building. The confetti began to fall, small, sparkling pieces drifting through the air, creating a colorful image in the vast space. Those pieces seemed like the bright rays of joy, like blessings that kept pouring down on Elara. But for Nathan, they only highlighted the emptiness inside him. Each piece that flew by was like a fading memory, a part of the past that he could no longer hold on to. The laughter, the well-wishes, all of it echoed like something unattainable, and he could only silently stand still, witnessing it all, without being able to participate, without being able to join in. The bouquet of white chrysanthemums he held in his hands, the delicate petals he had chosen as a gift for his daughter, were now slowly wilting under the light. The soft, pure white petals, once symbols of the love he had for Elara, now seemed to symbolize an unavoidable change. Those petals began to fall, each one like a fragment of memories breaking apart, like the love he had given to Elara, now reduced to pieces that could not be reassembled, could not be kept. He looked at the bouquet in his hands, feeling an emptiness, as if that love no longer had the strength to keep her close, to make her look at him the way she once did. The flashes from the cameras continued to burst, each one emphasizing his absence in those photos. Those photos would forever capture the beautiful moment of Elara in her wedding dress, standing next to her beloved husband, but he was just standing outside, unable to touch those moments. The flashes dazzled, but in his heart, there was only an endless void, something that nothing could fill. Each additional shot only highlighted the invisible distance between him and Elara. He was no longer the person she wanted to stand beside in those important moments of her life. She had a new life, and he, though her father, could no longer be a part of it. The sound of falling confetti, the flashing lights, but Nathan could no longer hear them. Inside him, there was only an empty echo, a profound loneliness he couldn't explain. He felt the sharp divide between him and Elara, the breaking of the bond he had thought would always remain strong. The memories of the little girl, of the afternoons spent in the garden, of the times he taught her the simple things in life, now only lived in his mind, like a part of the past he could not hold on to. Elara was no longer the child who needed his protection, no longer the little girl for whom he was the most important. The bouquet of white chrysanthemums in his hands now seemed like an inanimate object, a symbol of the loss he could not deny. The petals fell, like old memories, like the years he had devoted to her, now only fragments that could never be recreated, never revived. He stood there, his shadow stretching long on the floor under the stage lights, lengthening like the breaking that could never be undone. The petals fell like tears that could not be shed, like a wound that could never heal. He stood still, his heart aching, but unable to shed a tear. Everything he had lost, everything he couldn't hold on to, all came to him in that moment. Elara had moved on, had her own life, and he, though still loving her, could no longer step into that space. His steps slowly retreated, as though he no longer had the strength to move forward. That feeling, the feeling of no longer having a place in her life, the feeling of a loss that could not be put into words, made Nathan want to retreat into the shadows, so no one would see the pain, so no one would witness the breaking inside him. After leaving the wedding, Nathan didn't return home immediately. He couldn't. The scene from earlier still lingered vividly in his mind, like blurred patches of color that refused to blend together. All he could do was step outside, wander through the night, in search of a little peace within himself, amidst the chaos of emotions. The night had fallen, and the empty streets became a place where he could find some semblance of quiet, even if that quiet was painful. The sound of his shoes echoed steadily on the sidewalk, each step not soft or light, but reverberating inside him, like the tolling of a bell, a call to awaken. Beneath the dim yellow streetlights, everything around him turned blurry. The buildings, the old cars, all submerged in the chill of the night. But for Nathan, the cold wasn't coming from the weather. It was coming from within. The feelings he couldn't shake, the thoughts about his life, about the years he had given to his daughter, now seemed like a burden he couldn't shed. He walked alone, with no destination, no one to share the moment with. The night winds carried the smell of gasoline and dust, the sense of the quiet streets, but these only amplified the emptiness inside him. The smell of gas, the dust of the road, all signs of life. Yet for Nathan, they were reminders of a reality he could do nothing to change. They reminded him of the years he had sacrificed for his family, for his daughter, of everything he had given without ever receiving anything in return. As he walked through the familiar streets, the ones he and Alara had once wandered together, the places he had taken her when she was little, the loneliness deepened. He had sacrificed so much, given everything he had for his family, for Alara. He had set aside his own desires, his own dreams, to focus solely on caring for and raising her. The nights he stayed up working to give her a better life, the days he never rested, never relaxed, it was all for her. But now, when he looked at Alara, he realized that all those sacrifices were no longer enough. She didn't need him anymore. She had her own life, her own family, and he was left alone. The truth hit him like a heavy blow. In the past, he had convinced himself that as long as he loved her wholeheartedly, as long as he sacrificed everything, she would always need him. She would always come to him when things got tough, when she needed comfort. But now he realized that not all sacrifices could last forever, and not all love could remain in the hearts of others. Alara had grown up, she had carved her own path, and he could no longer be the one to guide her. He had given too much, but lost himself in the process. These thoughts kept swirling in his head as he walked down the deserted path. He didn't know where he was going, didn't know what his destination was, but each step carried a weight, as if he were carrying a burden he couldn't escape. The feeling of loss was not just the distance from Alara, it was the loss of himself. He realized that for so long he had forgotten about his own needs, his own small joys, forgotten the dreams he once had. His entire life had been devoted to nurturing and caring for others. But now, he didn't know what to do with himself. The sound of his shoes continued to echo on the empty sidewalk. No one walking with him. No one to share the silence with, just his footsteps and the occasional sighs, like waves in his mind. The wind still blew, carrying the smell of gasoline and dust, as if everything around him remained unchanged. Yet he felt himself being swept away, like a leaf falling into a current with no clear direction. Everything around him seemed normal, but inside, everything was in turmoil. The sacrifices he had made, the years he had given, now felt meaningless, as if he had lost the balance and self-respect he once thought he had. Nathan couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, the decisions he had made throughout his life. He had given everything for his family, for his daughter, but now, looking back, he realized that in those sacrifices he had lost himself. Everything he had given now seemed to have no value, no meaning. He had given too much, but couldn't get anything back, and in that moment, Nathan felt an emptiness deep within his heart, an empty space that couldn't be filled, a loss no one could understand. The sound of his footsteps, steady on the empty sidewalk, in the stillness of the night. His steps were not hurried. There was no destination, just simple, slow steps, as if he were trying to face the pain, trying to face the truth he could no longer avoid. The wind continued to blow, carrying strange smells, the smells of the street, of time passing. But Nathan no longer paid attention to them. What he felt now was only the loneliness in his heart, the pain of having sacrificed so much, only to lose himself. That feeling was not just the sadness of losing Elara, it was the realization of himself, of all the things he had neglected over the years, the sacrifices, the efforts he thought would bring happiness to his family, now only dragged him deeper into sorrow and disappointment. In this quiet night, Nathan could only keep walking, step by step, searching for answers within himself, looking for some peace in his heart, even though he knew nothing could soothe this pain. The park at night, where Nathan sat silently on the bench, was bathed in the pale yellow glow of the streetlights. A cool night breeze rustled through the barren branches of the trees, and the stillness of the space enveloped him. There was no one walking by, no laughter, only the sound of dry leaves crunching under his shoes, providing a backdrop to the quiet thoughts in his mind. Each breath felt like a battle within himself. Tonight, Nathan didn't seek comfort from anyone else. He only wanted to face the thoughts that had long been buried, the emotions he had tried to suppress for so long. But now, after everything, he could not escape them. He opened his old wallet, his dry fingers pausing over the papers tucked inside, pieces of things that had become inseparable from his memories. He pulled out the wedding receipt, still fresh and new, the words "Elara's wedding" clearly printed on it. It was a piece of paper symbolizing a new beginning, the dreams that Elara and the man she loved would build together. But when Nathan looked at it, the receipt felt heavy in his hand. The love he had given to Elara, unspoken, sacrificial and enduring through the years, now seemed to be nothing more than broken fragments of the past, a past he couldn't hold on to, couldn't grasp. The wedding receipt wasn't just a symbol of a wedding day. It was also a marker of the inevitable distance between them. Elara had her own life now, and he was no longer the first person she turned to when she needed to share, when she faced difficulties. He had become a part of the past, a part of days she no longer remembered. As he looked at that receipt, Nathan couldn't help but think of all the sacrifices he had made over the years. The late nights working, the moments he had forgotten about himself to worry for the family, to give her a better life, to help Elara achieve her dreams. Looking at the new receipt, Nathan felt that it not only marked a new beginning for Elara, but also the end of a chapter in his own life. The chapter in which he was the protector, the guide, the steadfast support. But now, all of that had changed. Elara no longer needed him. She had someone else now, someone she trusted and loved, someone she would spend the rest of her life with. And he, despite still loving her, despite still wanting to be the one standing beside her, could no longer do so. Looking at the receipt, he saw himself becoming part of the past, no longer connected to the present life of his daughter. But then, his hand brushed against something else in the wallet, a faded, yellowed receipt. It was the receipt he had received when he bought a pair of ballet shoes for Elara when she was little. He remembered that moment clearly, when she was just a child, with innocent dreams. When she begged him to buy her the ballet shoes so she could dance on stage. Elara had dreamed of being a dancer, and he, with all his love for her, had not hesitated to bring her those shoes, even though they were quite expensive for the family's budget. But what mattered most was the look in Elara's eyes when she received the gift, eyes full of hope, full of trust in the future. And he had promised her that he would always be there, always support her, no matter where she went or what she did. The old receipt, though yellowed with time, was priceless to him. It symbolized the unspoken love, the protection he had given Elara since she was a child. Those ballet shoes had witnessed Elara's hard training, her gradual growth not just in dance, but also in spirit. And he, though unspoken, had always been there, standing behind her, always ready to be the one she could turn to whenever she needed support. But now, Elara had grown strong enough to stand on her own, no longer needing him. The ballet shoes were no longer hers, but in his mind, they would always be the most beautiful memory of their father-daughter bond. As he placed the old receipt next to the new wedding receipt. The two pieces of paper seemed to symbolize two halves of his and Ilara's life. One, a fresh white sheet, glowing brightly with a future full of possibilities. The other, yellowed with age, bearing the marks of time, holding all the memories of the past. The wedding receipt marked a continuation, the beginning of a new phase in Ilara's life. The old receipt, however, was a trace of the years that had passed, the sacrifices he had made for her that no longer had a place in her present life. Nathan sat there, feeling the powerful contrast between the two pieces of paper. Each piece contained a story, a part of life. The years he had sacrificed, given freely without regret, now only left behind faint memories, memories that could never return. But this contrast wasn't a sign of failure. It was a lesson. He had learned the lesson about love, sacrifice, and acceptance. Love, no matter how great, sometimes cannot keep someone by your side forever. Sometimes, true love means knowing when to let go, allowing the person you love to live their own life, no matter how painful that may be. Nathan understood that his love for Ilara had been enough. It had been all he could give her, and now he needed to learn how to breathe, to live for himself, to no longer be the one who sacrifices without receiving anything in return. His love for her had been complete, but now he had to continue on his own path. In the quiet park, under the dim yellow light, Nathan realized that it was time to let go, to learn how to love himself. And in those thoughts, he understood that while his love for Ilara would always endure, he too had to learn to continue living and loving himself. The next morning, Nathan woke up earlier than usual. Just as the first rays of dawn had yet to filter through the window, the house was still, as if everything was submerged in a deep sleep. But Nathan couldn't sleep for another minute. Even though his eyes were tired and his body longed to drift into slumber, his mind couldn't find peace. The images from the previous night kept swirling in his head. Ilara, his daughter, in her pristine white wedding dress, standing beside her new husband, her smile full of happiness, her eyes shining as she looked at the man she would spend her life with. Everything was beautiful, but it felt incomplete for him. That image marked the end of a chapter, a confirmation that he was no longer the most important person in Ilara's life. Those thoughts haunted him, tightening his heart. He had sacrificed so much for his daughter, but now, despite the depth of his love, Ilara no longer needed him the way she once did. He sat up in bed, the faint light of dawn spilling into the room, but it wasn't enough to warm his heart or soothe his pain. The cold didn't come from the outdoor air, but from the deep emptiness within him. The night before, sitting alone in the park, he had realized something he hadn't wanted to admit. He had loved Ilara unconditionally, given everything for her, but now she had entered a new phase of life. And he, though still loving her just as much, no longer had a place in her life. Yet Nathan understood that he couldn't keep Ilara by his side forever, no matter how painful it might be. He had to learn to accept that. Nathan couldn't delay any longer. He knew today was the day he had to face his future son-in-law, to do what he had been avoiding for so long. He had to meet him, put everything on the table not through words, but through actions. The papers in his wallet, the mementos he had kept for all these years, would be his only tools to convey everything he couldn't say. In that moment, Nathan felt small, as though he were standing before an insurmountable wall. His son-in-law's office, a spacious and modern space, was nothing like the spaces he had been familiar with. The glass walls reflected the morning light, creating an elegant yet cold, lonely atmosphere. Everything in the room was meticulously arranged. From the documents to the gleaming computers, everything was perfect, just like the life Ilara had chosen for herself. A life full of comfort, but one that lacked his presence. There was no mess of family life, no remnants of love, just the silence of a world in which he no longer belonged. Entering the office, Nathan didn't rush. His footsteps echoed in the cold space, each step like a sign, a step toward acceptance. Though his heart was heavy, he walked to the polished wooden desk where his son-in-law was sitting. The room, though modern and formal, made Nathan feel like a stranger. He didn't need to speak the customary greetings. The silence in this space felt like part of the meeting he had been preparing for over the past weeks. He pulled the wedding receipt from his wallet, the paper still fresh and neat, like a new beginning in Elara's life. That receipt, though just a piece of paper, felt like a ticket, a significant milestone in her journey. But to Nathan, it symbolized an end. Not the end of love, but the end of his role as a father. The end of a chapter in his and Elara's life that he could no longer hold on to. Placing the wedding receipt on the table, Nathan continued by taking out an old yellowed receipt. It was the receipt he had received when buying ballet shoes for Elara when she was young, back when she dreamed of becoming a dancer. Those shoes were the first gift he ever bought for her, a gift she once cherished. The shoes symbolized the sacrifices and the hopes he had placed in his daughter. They had witnessed her hard work, her gradual growth, not only in dance but also in life. Every step she took, whether her first tentative moves or her confident strides on stage, was seen by him, and he had always been proud of her. But now, those ballet shoes were no longer used. Elara had grown up, and he was no longer necessary in her life. Placing the old receipt next to the new wedding receipt, Nathan felt the stark contrast between the past and the present, between sweet memories and the painful truth he now had to face. Each piece of paper, whether new or old, carried memories that could never be erased. And in those memories, Nathan understood that he could no longer be the most important person in her life. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, thick with silence. His son-in-law sat across from him, his eyes flicking over the papers, then looking up at Nathan, as if searching for an explanation, a reason for this strange action. But Nathan said nothing. He knew there was no need to speak. Everything was already clear through those papers, through the marks of the past, through all the sacrifices he had made. Those papers were undeniable truths, proof that didn't require words. They were memories of a life he had given to Elara. But now, those memories no longer kept her by his side. The son-in-law remained silent, looking at the wedding receipt and the old one, then glancing back at him. His gaze seemed surprised, but there was also something in it that seemed confused, as if he hadn't fully realized all that Nathan had done for the family. But Nathan didn't need an explanation. He didn't need his son-in-law's understanding. This wasn't about criticism, it wasn't about reprimanding, but about the silence of a father. A man who had sacrificed everything for his child, but now had to face the reality that those sacrifices weren't enough to keep his daughter with him. The light shone down on the polished wooden table, highlighting the two pieces of paper, the crisp white wedding receipt and the old yellowed receipt. They lay side by side, like two parts of Nathan's and Elara's lives. One fresh, full of hope. The other, a trace of a past that could never be reclaimed. Both carried the truth, but also the acceptance that everything he had done was enough. The room remained silent after Nathan spoke his final words, as if time itself had stopped, no movement left in the air. Only the space around them continued to breathe, but in that moment, everything seemed to be wrapped in silence. His words, though soft and not shouted, rippled through the stillness like stones thrown into a calm lake, creating ripples that couldn't stop spreading. This wedding is for you both. My gift has been given over 30 years. His words were like a farewell, a painful letting go, something he could never take back. The light from the window cast cold streaks on the shiny wooden table. The room now seemed covered in an invisible dust, and everything around him became decoration for a space no one truly lived in anymore. Nathan, with a steady pace, turned to leave. There was no hesitation in his actions. Each step was a severance, not from his daughter, but from the expectations, the hopes he once held for this relationship. He did not stop, nor look back, even though his heart was heavy, even though he still loved her. He knew, deep down, that he no longer had a place in Elara's life. His son-in-law, sitting in the room, couldn't utter a word. Nathan's words still echoed in his mind, and with each echo, It felt like a reminder of a sacrifice he had never truly understood. He watched Nathan's figure until it disappeared behind the glass door. His eyes were fixed on Nathan's retreating back, as if trying to hold on to a part of the past, something he didn't fully comprehend yet. Nathan's steps were quiet, but carried a determination his son-in-law couldn't ignore. He knew, no matter how hard he tried, the truth was a wall that separated two worlds. Nathan's footsteps faded, but the air in the room remained still, suffocating. Only the son-in-law remained, the man Nathan had once trusted to care for Alara, the man to whom he had once entrusted his daughter's heart. But now, all he had was a sense of unfamiliarity, as though nothing he had done over the years was enough to truly understand Nathan's heart, the heart of a father who had sacrificed everything. He looked down at the papers Nathan had left behind, the fresh wedding receipt and the old, yellowed receipt. Those pieces of paper, though lifeless, carried all the memories of a lifetime. The wedding receipt, clean and clear, was like a fresh commitment between Alara and the man she had chosen. But to Nathan, it represented a loss. It was the gift he had given Alara for 30 years, unconditional, with no demands. All he could do, and had done, was give her a love without expectation. But now, that sacrifice was not returned by love, but by distance. And the old receipt, though faded, was an inseparable part of his memory. It was the gift he had bought for Alara when she was a child, when all she knew were big dreams and the belief that her father would always be there, guiding her along. Looking at those papers, the son-in-law felt his hands tremble, and despite his effort to control it, the shudder in his body reflected everything he could not explain. Why had Nathan been so silent? Why had he let go so quietly? He didn't understand that it was acceptance, painful acceptance, without the need for words, only silent actions. He couldn't comprehend what Nathan had gone through, couldn't grasp the price of the unconditional sacrifice Nathan had made for Alara. It was a love that couldn't be measured, yet it was powerful and full of silence. The son-in-law sat there, his hand still resting on the old receipt, as if trying to accept everything Nathan had left behind. The memories, the undeniable truths, the things that could never be changed, all lay in those papers. Part of him wanted to say something, wanted to speak, but he couldn't find the right words. He could only sit quietly, looking at those papers, reflecting on the life he was living, on the responsibilities he hadn't fully embraced, on the things he had overlooked. In that moment, the son-in-law felt an indescribable heaviness. He couldn't say a word, couldn't do anything but sit in silence, while Nathan had already left. The room was now only filled with gentle darkness and weak light shining through the window. Nathan's footsteps had disappeared behind the glass door, and the son-in-law remained in that silence, wondering if he had truly understood what Nathan had gone through, what he had sacrificed, what he had given without ever asking for anything in return. The silence between them, in this moment, was facing all that had passed and could never be changed. And so, as the glass door closed, there was nothing left but an empty space of silence, where everything had ended, where Nathan had left an indelible mark, a trace his son-in-law would never easily forget. The whole room, now devoid of sound, without an explanation, only the pieces of paper, the unsaid words, and a sorrow that could never be erased. Alara returned to the old house on a late afternoon, after all the wedding proceedings had been completed. She couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness, as though a part of her old life had truly come to an end. She had done everything that needed to be done over the past days, smiled, chatted, planned, and accepted the congratulations from friends and family. Everything seemed perfect, but a deep, uncomfortable void lingered in her heart. Her wedding had unfolded with all its splendor and joy, but after everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had left behind other important relationships, including the father she had unintentionally distanced herself from over the years. She stepped into the old house, where so many childhood memories still lingered. This was the place where she had grown up, where every corner held sweet memories of the years spent with her father. But today, the feeling of the house was no longer the same. As she walked through the quiet rooms, there were no echoes of her laughter like there used to be, no unconscious conversations at the dinner table. Everything seemed too silent, too unfamiliar. Passing through the living room, her eyes inadvertently landed on her old toys still resting on the old wooden shelf. She paused for a moment, then moved closer. On the shelf were toys she hadn't touched in years. These toys, now just faint remnants of her past, evoked a strange sensation within her as she gazed at them. Among them, one small but very special item stood out. A wooden animal her father had carved for her when she was very young. That toy had once been a source of joy, a symbol of the bond between her and her father. But now it served as a reminder of the years gone by, of days she had unknowingly forgotten. She sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she picked it up. The paint on its wooden surface had chipped away with time, revealing rough, raw wood. But it still held its shape, though no longer as beautiful as when it was first made. She gently ran her fingers over the rough surface, and in that moment, childhood memories surged back, like a wave rushing in unexpectedly and powerfully. She remembered the afternoons when she was small, sitting in her father's lap, laughing and talking while he gently comforted her, watching her play with the toys he had made. This toy, though simple, held a world of love her father had given her. It wasn't an expensive or fancy gift, but a symbol of his unconditional love, of the warm moments they shared during her childhood. But now, looking at the toy, Elara couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow. The paint had peeled, revealing cracks in the wood that had deepened over time, just like her relationship with her father. Time spared no one. It didn't allow anyone to escape change. The sweet memories of her father, of the afternoons when he took her for walks, of the stories he told her, now only remained as fragments in her mind. No matter how much she wished to keep those moments, change could not be stopped. And those memories, now, could never return. Regret began to creep into Elara's heart. She remembered the years she had lived too quickly, too absorbed in external relationships, in her own dreams, without noticing the signs her father had tried to send her. She had gradually distanced herself from him, even though he had always been there, patient, waiting, never saying a word but always giving her his unceasing love. But as she grew older, she had turned her attention entirely to her own life, forgetting that her father too needed a place in her life. Looking at the wooden toy in her hand, Elara felt the softness of old memories. Though the paint had worn away and the wood had become worn, it still held its shape. Her father's love was just like that, imperfect, not radiant, but enduring and steadfast through time. Despite the hardships, despite the challenges, that love had never changed, always present, even though it couldn't be seen. It was unconditional love, a kind of affection she had never fully understood until now. The cracks in the wood felt like wounds in her heart, wounds she had unintentionally inflicted, not because she didn't love her father, but because she hadn't recognized that love until it was too late. She had been so caught up in her own life that she hadn't noticed the pain her father had quietly endured, even though he had never spoken a word. The things he never said, but which were expressed through his actions, his patience. She hadn't realized his sacrifices, not until now, when this old wooden toy once again opened a door to those memories. She held the toy in her hands and felt a shift in her heart, a feeling of relief, as though a heavy burden had been lifted. Gradually, she began to understand her father's pain, the pain of a father who always loved his daughter, always sacrificed everything for her, but never received the understanding from his own child. She understood that her father's love never asked for anything in return, never waited for a response, but simply gave everything he had. And in that moment, Elara realized that her love for her father was just like his love for her, steady, enduring, though not always perfect. But it was this steadfast love that she had forgotten for so long. Now, with this realization, she felt a sense of lightness, as though the knots in her mind had been untied, little by little. She could not go back and fix the years that had passed, but at least she could start again, with a love that was unconditional, a love as enduring and complete as the wooden toy she was holding tightly in her hands. Elara walked into the old house on a late afternoon, when the darkness had not yet fully enveloped the space, but the last rays of daylight had faded behind gray clouds. The cool air of autumn began to creep into the atmosphere, carrying with it a feeling of transition, of endings and beginnings. She stood before the old house, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. Everything was still there. The porch, the walls, the garden, and even the old swing she used to sit on with her father, but everything felt strangely distant, as though she were looking at a part of her memory that had shattered, unable to be pieced back together as it once was. The feeling was strange, both familiar and like an emptiness she could not fill. She stepped into the house where she had grown up, feeling a sense of lightness, yet also suffocating. The old house seemed to hold the marks of the past, the smell of aged wood, the traces of time on the walls, even the forgotten objects that had once been part of her life. Every step inside reminded her of the days spent with her parents, the evenings when they sat around the dinner table, the words her father spoke as he sat by the fire, gazing at her with love in his eyes. But now, everything had changed. She had grown, moved through the trials of life, and this old house, though seemingly unchanged, felt like a completely different world. She walked through the rooms she had once immersed herself in, playing, studying, and living with the innocent dreams of childhood. As she passed through the living room, a familiar yet alien sight caught her eye: the wooden shelf, where her old toys still sat neatly unchanged. Among them, one object stood out: a small wooden animal her father had made for her when she was a little girl. It wasn't the most beautiful toy, but it was the one thing she had always cherished. Though it had aged, with the paint chipped away over time, it still held its original shape. It wasn't just a toy. It was a symbol of the love her father had given her, a testament to the care and sacrifices he had made for her over the years. She stood quietly, gazing at the toy for a moment, her hands trembling as she reached for it. The paint had worn off, revealing the rough wood beneath, but it still remained intact. The coldness of the wood startled her, as if a part of the past had touched her. She remembered the days when she was little, sitting on her father's lap, as he carefully made this toy for her, giving it to her as an invaluable gift of love. This toy, along with others, was a testament to his love, but now she realized that this love had slipped through her fingers, something she hadn't cherished when she could. Looking at the wooden toy, Elara didn't just see childhood memories. She felt the pain her father had endured. The love he had for her wasn't always perfect. It wasn't always recognized as it should have been. But it was a love that was always there, steadfast and unwavering, no matter how many years had passed. The cracks in the paint, the parts of the wood worn down over time, were like the relationship between her and her father. Though sometimes faded, it had still endured, standing strong through the challenges of time. A feeling of regret began to fill Elara. Had she ever noticed these things? Had she ever understood that her father had always sacrificed for her, given her everything, without asking for anything in return? She hadn't seen the silence in his actions, hadn't realized that his silence was a way he expressed his love for her, through each gift, each caring gesture he gave, without words. She had been too caught up in her own dreams, her own aspirations, to realize that her father, even though he never spoke, had always waited for her, always loved her unconditionally. But now, looking at this toy, the feeling of regret and sorrow overwhelmed her. She couldn't undo the years that had passed, couldn't reverse the moments she had missed, but at least she could recognize that love now. At least she could understand the pain her father had endured all this time. A pain, not because he didn't love her, but because he had loved her so much that perhaps there was no room left to receive love from her. With that heavy feeling, Elara lifted the toy and leaned against the armrest of the swing. She sighed, gently brushing over the scratches on the wooden surface, and in her heart, a part of those cracks seemed to be healing. The feeling of parental love, though complicated and full of pain, was still an unconditional love. No matter how many years passed, no matter how many distances were created, that love would always exist, always wait. And in this moment, she realized she needed to reconnect with that love, not through words, but through actions, through presence, through forgiveness. The soft wind blew through the porch, carrying the scent of jasmine flowers in the air, soothing the tightness in her heart. She didn't need to say anything more. She simply needed to feel the love in this presence. And then, from behind, she felt her father approach. No greeting, no words spoken, just a silence full of love. He sat down beside her, not in a hurry, not needing to explain anything. Everything was already clear in both their hearts, in the memories reborn in this moment. And then, Elara turned, her gaze meeting her father's. No more coldness, no more distance. She gently rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body transfer to hers, as if it were an apology, a thank you long overdue. She spoke a simple sentence, "Thank you, Dad." The moonlight softly covered the porch, like a thin blanket over the two of them in this moment. That feeling was peaceful, without the need for more words. Everything had been exchanged in the silence, in the steadfast love they had given each other, no matter how much time had passed. Just sitting together, needing nothing more. Everything was already complete. And so, the story ends not with a loud thunderclap or a hasty conclusion, but with a gentle, reflective ending, like a wave gently lapping the shore after a storm. Elara, on her journey to reconnect with her father, not only discovered the love he had for her, but also the unconditional love she herself had for him. This was not about revenge or retribution, as many stories of vengeance lead us into never-ending spirals, but about forgiveness, a gentle release. It's a reminder of a profound truth. Sometimes, it's not the things we seek, but the things we've missed in the past that need healing. The love in this story isn't the flashy kind. It's not loud laughter or grand moments. It's the quiet hugs, the simple gifts like the wooden toy, and the constant presence over the years, unseen but always there. It's what was forgotten amidst the busyness of life, in the dreams of youth, but then returns in gentle moments, when we are ready to look back and realize that love is present in the smallest things. The story does not end with revenge. There is no one suffering or paying a price. Instead, Elara and Nathan each find their own path to healing. Healing doesn't mean erasing the past, but letting those wounds guide us to a better future. When Elara returned to her father, it wasn't because she wanted to fix all the mistakes, but because she realized that true love doesn't need explanations, just understanding and acceptance. And in that moment, when she rested her head on his shoulder, all the cracks in her heart were mended. This story is not just a family tragedy, but also an emotional inner journey, a reminder that sometimes healing begins with confronting the most painful things, accepting them, and allowing ourselves to forgive. We cannot change the past, but we can change how we view it and how we act in the present. This is what Elara learned, and perhaps it is something each of us must learn. Looking back at this story, we cannot help but realize that each of us carries wounds, past pains that we've avoided facing. But those wounds, if given the chance to heal, can become a great source of strength, guiding us to a better version of ourselves. Healing is not about forgetting, but about letting those memories become lessons, becoming the strength that helps us grow. Thank you for following this journey with me. This story is not just Elara and Nathan's, but ours as well. Each person has their own struggles within, and perhaps what you have read today might be the beginning of change in your own life. Share your thoughts with us, so we can together open our hearts and heal the wounds you may have kept hidden for so long. Every story, every feeling you share, could be the small flame that helps someone find their light in the dark. So, What do you think of this story? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, because who knows, your words might be the turning point for someone else in their healing journey. Don't hesitate to open your heart and share, because it's possible that you will be the one to change someone's life.